Okay, turning a taper on a lathe, you've got several options, and the lathe that I've got here shows three of those options. There's on this lathe the ability to rotate the headstock, which is great for short and quite steep tapers. You've got a top slide or compound slide that allows you to turn at an angle and turn a taper. And we've got the ability to set over the tailstock again for turning a taper. What I haven't got is a taper turning attachment, and for turning this Morse taper, setting over the tailstock is the option. Okay, we've got the 3-jaw chuck removed from the headstock, got a faceplate in there, drive dog on the workpiece. The workpiece has been faced off centre drilled at both ends. I've got enough length here for the tapered piece that I want. I want to turn the taper. The gauge length is for number 1 Morse taper is 2 1/8 of an inch, so I'll want to get at least 2 1/4 inches down here so that I've got enough length. And the first thing to do is just turn a reference for the small diameter at the what will be the small end of the taper, and that's 0.369 of an inch. So I'll just turn a small distance there. That means that when I'm turning the taper I won't have to measure anything, I'll just have to go down to that finished diameter that I'll have already just marked off at the end there. The rest of the piece I'll skim down probably to 1/2 inch. The large end of the taper should be 0.475 at the gauge length, so I'll go from more 1/2 inch or so. It's not that critical, and if when I actually come to use it, I'll turn it down to something sensible, using the taper to hold in the headstock. This is the vulnerability with this method. Extension on the tailstock. Tailstock quill is right out here. If you think in the casting, it's probably goes back about that far. Probably only got an inch, maybe a bit more, of the quill held there, so that has to be really tightly clamped in to make sure it doesn't move. We've already checked that the centres are turning parallel, so I'll just turn those reference. Okay, so now one end, the narrow end of the taper, just by the centre here, at this end, has been turned down to the small diameter required for the taper, which is 0.369 inches, and this end of the taper, apart from the little step at the bottom, which, as I say, is a reference, the rest of this has been turned parallel, and it's about 1/2 inch. I got it near to 1/2 inch, and to be honest didn't measure it after that. And so now this would be taken out, and we put the reference taper between centres to set over the tailstock. Okay, to set the reference taper up, I've taken the compound slide off here simply because it's the easiest way to do it on my lathe. There's no real reason. You could do all the referencing off of the tool post or the compound or any flat surface. For me, it's going to be easiest to put an angle plate on here to pick up on the reference. Reference taper is in here. It's an existing MT1 centre, point of which goes into a female centre on the tailstock and a male centre in the headstock. I've taken the faceplate off, give me a bit more space and also make it easier to see stuff. Basically all we need to do is put the angle plate or whatever reference you're using, as I say you could use the tool post in here, just touch it on to the reference taper, make sure it's not fouling at any end, clamp it down, and usually the default method for checking this is cigarette paper, so I don't actually smoke myself, I buy these specifically for this task. So that's just pinching there, and if I check at the other end, it's just pinching there. So and that's just with enough force to pinch the paper. It's not actually moved the angle plate. So now tighten that up, and I'll have the reference angle. Wide end of the taper that I'm using as a reference is at the tailstock end. So now the female centre has been taken out, dead centre back here in the tailstock, the workpiece and the dog and the faceplate all back in position, works back between the centres. This is the reference surface that gives us the taper angle, and tailstock's been undone, these two bolts, and I've shifted it across, and again if I just check that it just pinches at that end and it just pinches at that end, so the offset of the tailstock is in line with the taper that I need. If I tighten up the two bolts that hold the tailstock onto the base that travels on the bed, now that will inevitably have moved stuff, so I'll try again. So the paper's just pinched there. It's just pinched at that end. I seem to be rather lucky I got away without it shifting too much here. So again, like all these things when you're setting up, there's a bit of trial and error, and things do shift as you tighten them, so that's gripped. That's gripped. So the situation now is the tailstock is offset towards me, so this end of the taper is going to be the narrow end. I've got the reference already turned on the taper there, and know the diameter I'm going down to, and now I just need to take the taper along. This end's wider than it needs to be, so I'll end up with a bit of a step at the end there. You can see I've already got it. So I'm turning the taper by feeding the saddle down the bed. It's obviously turning parallel to the headstock axis, but because the tailstock's set over, the workpiece is turning a taper. There's still quite a bit to take off the diameter, so I've really just started, but I've got about probably an inch or so of taper, maybe a little bit more, and that's enough to check, just to make sure I'm sort of heading in the right direction with this, just in case something's gone wrong with the setup. Assume nothing, check everything, so I'll just wait till this cut's finished and then I'll just check the taper. So okay, that's finished that cut. And if I release the tailstock, I can take out the workpiece. I'll just wipe that off, and to test it I'm just going to try it on an MT1 sleeve, and that there's no there's no rattle on that, it's not moving around. It's not a good finish yet, but at least that would have picked up if the taper doesn't fit, you would feel it rattle, so that's good. I'm testing it on an adapter sleeve, MT1, MT2 adapter. You could just easily take the centre out and check it in the tailstock for the machine it's going to be used in, or headstock taper, just as easy. And then we can just pop that back into the centre, just make sure there's no dirt in there. Clamp that up, and just a bit of oil on that. Some people use grease, doesn't much matter, and we carry on. The taper's now finished turned to length. It's taken just down so that the tool is almost on the small diameter at the bottom, so it's very slightly wide at the bottom there at the moment, but we just check it and so take it out from the centres, and if I mark with some blue just on the along the taper, if we test fit this into a socket, anywhere that's high will smear the ink away, and if it's good contact all the way around, then this should stay nice and blue. So it rings, and it looks like there's a little high patch there, but that rings quite well on despite that little high patch. Maybe I'll just polish that down, and there we are, Morse taper.